Morticians of Reddit, what is the most bizarre, uncomfortable, creepy, etc. case or situation you've had to deal with? Not me, but my best friend works in the death business. So, since she doesn't have a Reddit account, I'm going to steal her karma because this is my favorite story. She tells me all sorts of lovely things about her job and the recoveries she has done, but my favorite involves a gurney and some stairs. To set the scene, a family called in that their mother had passed in her apartment. 3rd story, narrow halls and no elevators. Anyways, she goes to pick up the body to take back to the funeral home with an assistant. So they get up there and lift this woman who is close to 300 pounds onto the gurney and begin their journey down to the van. Mind you, the whole family was there and pretty much in hysterics and crowd around as they make their way to the stairs. With family watching, they make it about halfway down the first flight of stairs when the body starts to slide. There's no way to reposition, so my friend who is at the foot of the gurney is now about butt level to the freshly deceased. So, trying to make the best of the situation, they continue their way down and try not to shift the body anymore. The thing about dead bodies is that gas starts to exit pretty quickly, and I'm sure you know where my story is going. The body started letting out farts straight into my friend's face. PFFFFT, PFFT, PFFT, PFFT with every step down they take. And this poor girl has to keep a straight face while getting crop dusted by a dead lady with her whole family watching. TLDR, nothing worse than dead butt. I really don't know if there's a more uncomfortable position to be in. Well, this was not really a mortuary, but I was a student many years ago in the anthropology department at the University of Tennessee. Dr. Bill Bass, a sort of PT Barnum of forensic anthropology, not a faker, but a heck of a promoter, was the department head, and a major focus of the department was forensic anthropology. This was also before DNA testing, so skeletal forensics was essential in identifying bodies that were partially decayed. Dr. Bass would get about 15-20 cases every year, decayed or skeletal remains, to hopefully identify or at least profile race, gender, approximate age, any distinguishing characteristics, and sometimes cause of death. Usually these were vagrants, crime victims, or just historic or prehistoric, Native American remains. One time in West Tennessee they found a clothed but fully skeletonized body in a patch of dense vegetation in a little town in West Tennessee. The local sheriff and coroner loaded the body in the back of a pickup truck and drove the corpse all the way across the state, 400 miles, to Knoxville so Dr. Bass could do an ID. When the truck arrived, Dr. Bass went out and opened the body bag to find a complete skeleton that remained fully dressed. He looked the body up and down and then reached into the front pocket of the corpse's jeans and pulled out a wallet, which he opened to read off the name, address, race, height and hair and eye color of the deceased. The sheriff and the coroner were a bit embarrassed. It turned out the dead guy had only been missing for about a week, but in the dense foliage of a West Tennessee thicket in midsummer, the bugs and beetles had completely stripped his bones of flesh. Bass did do a follow-up to make sure the driver's license and the corpse were a match. Dr. Bass had many interesting cases. He founded the infamous Body Farm, has written several books, fiction and non-fiction, and is featured, in fictional form, in many of Patricia Cornwell's crime novels. My 14-year-old daughter wanted to be a forensic scientist earlier in life, and has remained firm that when she dies, she wants her body to go to the body farm. Lady I work with used to pick up the bodies for the coroner. One time they had to collect a woman that was laying in a very hot attic apartment for a couple months. All her liquids ran out onto the floor and dried, and when they tried to pick her up she started coming apart like an overly tender turkey. Her co-worker sent her to the van to get more bags, and when she got back he had finished bagging the lady. Classy. Changed how I think about turkey. I know a mortician that had to deal with a morbidly obese guy that died in his bathroom and melted onto the rug, so they moved him with the rug still fused on him. They needed 4 people to move him and he just kept falling apart. It was the summer months also, and the smell was described as unbearable. He still loves his job though. Not me, but my dad and his friend, the mortician, Mr. Mort. My dad was doing some business on the other side of the state, pretty close to where his friend Mr. Mort lived. Mr. Mort invited him for a coffee, but said, "Hey, while you're here, Can you help me with a particularly heavy one? Meaning a large body needed to be cremated. My dad was in prime shape and said sure. There was a 350-400 pound, 25-28 stone lady that needed to be moved from a gurney to the conveyor belt contraption to be rolled into the crematorium furnace. Normally, she'd be placed into some kind of cardboard coffin, but she was simply too large, so had to go in wearing a hospital gown. After some planning and effort, they successfully moved her over to the belt without dropping her, pushed her into the furnace, and turned it on. The crematorium was nearly automated. Basically, push a button, and it went through everything it needed to do to properly turn whatever was inside to ash. So, my dad and Mr. Mort said it, and walked down the street for a coffee. About 20 minutes later, they see a fire truck go by, and think nothing of it. Then another one goes by. This was a small town in western South Dakota, so there weren't many fire trucks. They walked outside, and there were flames coming from the crematorium, and some oil was coming from the building, and the smell of burnt ham. What happened? The lady was so large that there wasn't enough space around her body in the furnace to generate the heat necessary to properly turn her to ash, but there was enough heat to melt her skin and turn her fat reserves into hot oil and leak out of the crematorium. The oil set the building on fire. Thankfully it was in a separated garage, so the entire mortuary didn't go up in flames, and flaming oil started to flow down the driveway and down the street. The first fire engine was parked too close to the fire, and the hot oil flowed past the tires on one corner, then melted and popped them. So you had a bit of pandemonium of firefighters spraying the flames, and others jumping into the two fire trucks to move them away ASAP. Sorry for the abrupt ending, but I don't remember anything about the aftermath. I'll have to ask my dad when I see him. Since this question was posted 18 hours ago, I'm guessing only a few people will see my post, but you're welcome. Well, I don't know if anyone else will read your story, but I did, so thanks for putting it up. Licensed embalmer here. I've worked for large funeral homes and did coroner removals for a decently large city and currently work as a trade embalmer. I've had lots of suicides. Embalmed a 4-year-old that a cop blew a stop sign and boned their minivan. That one really hurt. But the one that was weird was this. 18-year-old girl hung herself. So I do the embalming like normal even though it sucked having to do that. Now the weird part, I get a text from my friends a few hours later saying that another one of our friends' fiance's sisters killed herself and if I knew anything about it. Which really sucks because my friend's wedding is in 4 days. Turns out that 18-year-old was the sister to the bride. So I have to go to the wedding 4 days later while everyone is still grieving the loss and keep my mouth shut, and I'm the one that embalmed her. This was in a town of about 250,000 people. Worked in a mortuary for a few months because I needed a job and it was at night. My job pretty much was checking the bodies as they were brought in and put them in a cold storage. One night they brought in 2 bodies, back to back from a convalescing home. I didn't have time to put the first away yet, so I put it off to the side while I signed in the new delivery. The people leave and I go back to the first body and notice that it wasn't exactly as I left it. When I left it the body was flat on its back, and when I got back it was sorta scrunched up. I backed the frick out of the room and just sat down. The mortician came out and saw me pale as a ghost. I told him what happened and he laughed. He then proceeded to explain to me sometimes the body will curl up after death because of rigor mortis, and after that's done it'll go back to being limp. He proceeded to tell me that some cases are so bad that the bodies sit straight up. Frick that. He ended up putting the bodies away and I spent the rest of the night freaked out. Not a mortician, but a gravedigger. I was 18. It was my first full-time job. I was learning the ropes and the boss man told me to mark out a grave. A wife was joining her husband, many decades after his interment. My co-worker taught me how to spec out an adjoining grave site, split the tombstone in half, move over 6 inches, then plot the new grave with string in the prescribed dimensions. I did that. Then the backhoe arrived. As the backhoe guy dug the grave, a problem emerged. We could see bones in the dirt. My co-worker stopped the backhoe guy and started yelling at me. I told him I marked the site exactly as he said. 6 inches to the left of the center of the marker, then 3 feet wide, 8 feet long, etc. I did as I was told, but it appears the husband wasn't sighted correctly and was not buried in a vault. His cheap pine coffin had rotted and he was everywhere. But it was still all my fault. Apparently, the backhoe dug down an extra foot into the husband's side of the site. I was tasked to jump in and reinter all the bones on his side of the site. So I jumped in and packed all those bones and dirt into his side. My co-worker and the backhoe guy had a laugh while yelling at me about bones I had missed and making me pack them in. We walled up his side of the grave nice and even, then overpacked it a bit and finished up the wife's grave. It was some grisly crap, man. But hey, it was 1982 and I was making $10 an hour, which was big money. With great wealth comes great responsibilities. Those guys were buttholes. Not a mortician story, but my dad was in the Coast Guard in the early 70s, stationed in San Francisco. Between the Golden Gate Bridge and Bay Bridge, they would get a lot of jumpers, and the coasties had to retrieve the bodies. At night or in bad weather, they would sometimes take hours or even a day or more to find. One day they retrieved a body and the body was being eaten by crabs. Dad said there were more than a dozen crabs all over the body. The body was basically a big piece of crab bait. Some other coastie on the boat is pulling the crabs off the body, putting them in a cooler. Guy says to my dad, my wife loves Dungeness crab and apparently was notorious for being the guy who claimed the crabs. I work in the industry. The creepiest thing I have seen would be one of my first pickups. There was a humidifier in the room, but I didn't know about it. I thought the deceased was still alive and wheezing. The most uncomfortable would probably be a guy in a halfway house style place and there were people everywhere. Just strange situation. Or a lady that was a crazy hoarder. All the time someone died at a huge party in the front yard. You ain't experienced life until you see a 2+ week decomposed body that's been in the heat. I didn't know maggots could be so big. Have a colleague that had a person who had passed away 6 weeks earlier. Said it was mostly liquefied. I have to say it has been the most humbling experience personally. There are some bad eggs but overall most people are amazing and you really appreciate those people that have lived such good lives. Don't leave your family for granted. I see it all too often when someone dies. Family tear each other up over money and petty foods. Give your loved ones love and respect. Most bizarre, particularly difficult family. None of them could agree at all on what to do with their dad. One faction wanted burial, the other was demanding cremation. After much shouting they finally agreed on a compromise. They wanted us to cut their father's body in half. That way one half could be cremated and the other half buried. I had to explain to the unfortunate arranger, who at this point looked beyond exhausted, that no, we could not saw a human body in half because that would be very illegal and very messy. Most uncomfortable. I'm 5'3" and was about 120 at the time. I was sent on a removal at a private residence with my supervisor. We get there, and the family of the deceased consisted of half a dozen or so very tall men, every one of them well over 6 feet tall. Coincidentally, my supervisor was also male and unusually tall. They greeted him cordially, but as soon as I entered the home it was like a switch was thrown. Every single one of them looked at me with pure contempt. I was not spoken to, only stared and glared at. They would not allow me to touch their grandfather. I was shouldered out of the way and blocked by the grandsons. I don't intimidate easily, but I had a wall of hostile giants staring me down from inches away. Once the deceased was on the gurney they refused to even allow me to push. They assisted my supervisor themselves. It was really uncomfortable. The only thing that my supervisor and I could think of was that they didn't think I was strong enough to lift the body. Being small I got that from time to time, but people were usually trying to be helpful. This was pure anger and hostility. I had a summer job one year when I was at university nearly 40 years ago. As an orderly at the local hospital, I was assigned to the morgue, and when a patient died on the ward we would go up and bring the body back down after the nurses had cleaned the person up and family had said their goodbyes, etc. One day we had to get this woman who died during the night. She must have been 30 stone. Docs decided on an autopsy, so we had to move her from the gurney type thing to the slab. As I was the young guy, the experienced orderly said that I had to take the head. This woman was gargantuanly fat. She was also slippery, like her skin was greased. I lost my grip and dropped her and her head smacked into the floor. We got her up on the slab and the doc came in and there was blood pooling under her head. The drop had cracked her skull open. He had a look and said that it was a good thing she was dead because that would have killed her. transported a 60-year-old woman to the morgue after a severe car accident. She had ran into a large tree heading 75 miles per hour. Face was mashed in completely. After they raided the body, they found a tube of lipstick in her brain. Cause of death was putting on makeup while driving, i.e., lipstick. I know we're supposed to respect the dead, but all I can think is, what in butthole? It's just sheer luck she took out only herself and not a bunch of innocent bystanders. Distracted or drunk driving is basically attempted murder. I work in forensics, specifically as an entomologist. I extract insects from decomposing bodies to estimate the time of death or supplement existing evidence. It's as grotesque an occupation as you can imagine. The most odious cadaver was the partial skeletal remains of an 8-month pregnant mother who gave life to a plethora of maggots, botflies, and moth larvae were consuming her hair like some monstrous funeral shroud. The tiny bones of the baby were disintegrating under the unrelenting feasting of ham beetles as its flesh was too dry for maggots to find purchase. They preferred the malleable flesh of the mother's face and breasts. Observing the corpse, her exposed womb appeared to be giving birth. Many adult beetles were scuttling over her pubic bone and into the cradle of her pelvis. She was supine. Her limbs were not splayed in distress, but unfortunately her expression was indiscernible due to the divots of botflies imbued in the flesh of her cheeks. Then I began my extraction. It was a drug-induced suicide which encapsulated the tranquility of her and her child's death. This was beautiful but horrible imagery. Seriously spine-tingling, disturbingly alluring, and yet appalling. You should consider writing a horror novel. Not a mortician, but in middle school my friend's dad was. This wasn't a situation about a body, just the mortician himself. He was a single dad and my friend's sister was going to a school dance but hadn't put on much makeup before and she didn't want to be late. So the mortician dad volunteered to do it for her because I put on people's makeup every day. When he finished, she looked in the mirror and freaked out. "I'll look like I'm dead." He just nonchalantly said, "What did you expect? I've only ever worked with dead people before," and just walked away. I wish there was a picture of it. She looked like a deranged undead clown. Her first clue should have been when he had her laid down on a drainage table to do her makeup. I'm still working on my licenses, so I'm not officially a funeral director and embalmer yet, but I've been going to the medical examiner's office to practice embalming with my school for several months now. The people we work on down there are not in very good shape, usually dead at least a month before we get to see them. Needless to say, it's not a one artery, low formaldehyde job. Each week we raise a minimum of 6 arteries, both carotids, both femorals, and both axillaries, plus the 2 radials if there's some trouble getting fluid distribution to the hands and forearms. To put into perspective, a typical funeral home case would only need 1, maybe 2 arteries depending on the embalmer's preference. There aren't a lot of creepy or bizarre cases that stick out in my mind, but uncomfortable things definitely come up. Whenever there's a young person on the table is sad. The degree of decomp can lead to a lot of difficult nights. The smell alone can really get to you. The thing that always spooks me, though, is when I'm raising an axillary artery. The site that we look for it is the area directly distal towards fingers, away from body mass, to the armpit. There are a lot of tendons and such in there, as well. When you're holding the person's arm up, digging around near the tendons, sometimes their arm will move. It happens a lot, but I still get momentarily terrified when the person grabs me. Other than that, there's not much I can contribute to this question. I know some second-hand stories from other people, but anything directly from me isn't too exciting. I have lots of stories of conventionally gross things, but nothing really bizarre. Well, don't leave us in the dark. Give us some of your gross stories. My brother told me a story of when one of his friends was mortician's assistant. One time he had to work on a guy who had shot himself in the head with a shotgun. He said the guy kinda looked like Sid from Ice Age. That wasn't the worst, however. The worst part is how he felt about the whole situation. He apparently felt disconnected, not registering that this body was once a living man and not just something to clean up. My brother said he quit that night. That is how I felt, and everyone eventually started feeling when we learned anatomy. They teach anatomy by dissecting cadavers. My most peculiar call I ever went on. It was my birthday last year and I was on call. I get a call at 3:30 am that we have a residential death. Our medical examiner deputy called the funeral home and told us to bring reinforcements. I meet up with a co-worker and we get to the house about 30 minutes later. The ME pulls us aside and tells us the guy is in the basement. He's 6'8" and probably 300 pounds. So there is just 3 employees of the funeral home and our ME at the house. By the grace of God we get this guy onto our cot, but then we have to get this guy up the flight of stairs. The 2 older guys go up front and I take the back with my coworker. When you take a cot up a flight of stairs you don't really know how hard it is unroll. You get both sets of wheels on the stairs. The first 4 stairs go pretty well, but we know the back wheels are about to go up. I've dealt with large people and stairs before, but this was a different demon. There was really only enough room for 1 person on the stair, so I volunteered to try. We made it maybe 2 stairs before his body shifted on the cot and he started sliding back. We brought him back down and ended up calling the fire department. The fire department brought 10 guys. We tied off the cot and tried making it up the stairs again, but it just wasn't going to happen. The fire chief and my funeral home owner told us to wait and went to talk to the family upstairs. After a while the chief came down with a sawzall and told us that when making a door, we cut a hole in the side of the wall, wheeled him out and put an end to the longest removal of my career. One of the firefighters was a woodworker and he came back that day and fixed up the wall in the basement. I showed up to the fire station that day with 5 pizzas and a case of beer. TLDR, we had to cut a hole in a basement wall to get a large body out. Firefighters are amazing. Not me, but my cousin. He works at a funeral home and helps pick up bodies, do the preservation steps and make up. Anyways, the most disturbing story he told me was about this about 30-year-old woman who came into the place and planned out then paid for her whole funeral. Few mornings pass, then my cousin gets a call from the boss telling him he needs to go and pick up a body of that same woman. My cousin asks where the body is, and the boss replied without back. Turns out the lady had planned to commit suicide. She paid for the whole funeral, laid out a big tarp behind the building, and shot herself. The silver lining is my cousin said that it made for really easy cleanup. That story still haunts me. She was really considerate. About 7 years ago, my friend took a gig as a custodian for a funeral home. The job description itself sounded great from what he told me. It was graveyard shift and not full time, but the pay was good. The funeral home was pretty small. Actually been to some funeral services there before. Basically a small medium-sized chapel, an extension on the side room to seat more people, and then a hall with bathrooms and a few offices. Next, the funeral home was a separate garage-looking building where the mortician would take care of his business. Okay, now let's get to the story. The guy only worked the job 6 days before leaving. Here's how he described it to me. First few days went okay. He was nervous about working there at night, but was able to brave it out. His 4th day, he finishes the main building and goes to quickly check the second building. From how he explained it to me, he actually didn't really need to clean in there as much as do a quick walkthrough. He goes in, quickly looks around and then starts to leave. Then, at the last moment he hears something drop and hit the ground. He stops and stares back for a moment, and decides frick it, I don't care. This is where crap gets weird. He walks back inside main building to put away supplies when he swears he catches what looks like someone sitting in one of the pews get up and walk away. This was only from the corner of his eye, but it was enough to stun him in fear. He takes a moment to gather himself, then walks out, and locks everything up for the night. Just at that last moment, he hears a loud bang, like a door slamming. He bolts to his car and speeds home. The following days didn't have anything drastic like that, but that single event was enough for him to know the job just wasn't for him. When I worked night shift at the funeral home, things like this tended to happen. At first it was unnerving, but I got used to it. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.